Hello again. So again, I have the honor and privilege of continuing my conversation with a seasoned diplomat who no longer is in the service, but was there for 26 years with different postings, one of them also being Washington, D.C. And in addition to after that, he wrote 10 books on nuclear dangers. So he's a seasoned writer. And after that, became a lecturer on several cruise lines. And as I said in my previous interview or conversation, I definitely think that if you ran into him, you must have been thoroughly entertained.
Thank you.
One other thing that I particularly like is that all of this came about in an unusual time. So he uncovered all these minutiae and little details, etc., while he was stretching his legs in the neighborhood. Isn't that wonderful? So without further ado, I got to tell you, the book is called Spies, Bombs, and Beyond. Put it up there. A Walking History of Washington, D.C.'s Tenleytown. Author Mark Fitzpatrick. Mark, good afternoon. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, Adrian. Thanks very much for that introduction.
So today we want to do two things. This is part two. In our first section, we covered spies, embassies, etc. And today we want to cover specific properties and history of specific properties. And when you hear properties, it's not necessarily a home. You'll be surprised. Having said that, I do want to give Mark the floor to cover a couple of little details from our past interview. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I was really embarrassed afterwards, the last interview. I made two egregious mistakes. The most egregious was I called Joe McCarthy Gene McCarthy, and that's really egregious because I'm a Minnesotan, and Gene McCarthy was one of our favorite sons, liberal left wing, and Joe McCarthy was his raving right wing from next door, Wisconsin. So it was Joe McCarthy that was pursuing.
Okay. And what was the second one?
Second one was I mixed up MI6 and MI5. MI6 is the British equivalent of CIA, and MI5 is the equivalent of FBI.
Yeah, I think you did invert them. Definitely, definitely. So I'd like to, now that we've clarified these little details, why don't we move forward with our properties today? And I wanted to ask you, this is like most of the neighbors that walk the neighborhood always ask, what is the Van Ness Reservoir?
Yeah.
What's the secret there?
Yeah, the secret. It looks secretive because it's surrounded by a tall fence with barbed wire, and it's got warning signs. It's a U.S. government. It's got every corner CCTV TV. Well, and so a good friend of mine, who's a pretty smart guy, he's a former Foreign Service officer like me. Mark, it's not just a reservoir. There's something, something military related to it, I'm sure. I said, no, I think it's just a reservoir. And then, as I was doing research for my book, I came across this website, Urban DC Moms and Dads, and somebody posed the same question to them. What's that reservoir? And it must be something intelligence related because it's so mysterious. But
right.
Sometimes a reservoir is just a reservoir. But as I've been talking to neighbors about my book, and something that I didn't put in my book, I recently learned, is that a lot of people think that it has a direct pipeline to the White House, and that's why it's so heavily guarded. When they were doing renovation at Turtle Park, this nice recreation area for kids, just kitty corner from the reservoir, they came across some pipes that were not located in any blueprints or maps or anything, and so they thought, aha, here's evidence. But I have not been able to track down any connection. But the one reason people think there might be a connection is because the White House used to really have bad water.
Mm-hmm.
It was the bad water at the White House was why William Henry Harrison died in the White House after only 32 days in office.
Wow.
He contracted malaria, typhoid fever from the polluted water at the White House. And then that was in 1841. And then 8 years later, James Polk died, and probably also from polluted water. And then the next year, Zachary Taylor, 1850, died. And then 12 years later, Abe Lincoln's favorite son, Willie, 11 years old, died And all of these can be traced to the bad water at the White House. So,
Wow.
realization that they really needed to improve the water supply. And so shortly after that, the Washington Reservoir, the aqueduct, was put in place. It was the first water pipe system of its type in the United States. And it pumped water from the Potomac at Great Falls up to Delacaria, where it was treated and filtered and so forth. And then, for a while it went in downtown, but after a while they built these reservoirs at the highest parts of the city. And one of them is the one at Van Ness, and there's another one at Reno Park.
Right.
And these reservoirs, the water goes up there. It stays for only 3 days, and then it flows down by gravity and supplies our nation's.
And so it still comes from Great Falls, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Say again?
The water still comes from
the Potomac
and
Great Falls. From Great Falls, and it comes from pipes that were actually pre-Civil War pipes were built there.
Interesting,
So
very interesting.
The Washington Aqueduct is a very interesting structure if you're exploring the architecture of the city.
Wonderful. So let's go on to now something completely different that I particularly like, because it does remind me of the Flintstones, and that is Shroom House. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I came across this and said, what the heck is this? It looks like a mushroom. I mean, that's why it's called a shroom. It's got a plaque on the front. It looks like maybe something out of the Lord of the Rings. And originally it was just a regular house like we have all over AU Park. It's just outside AU Park, just across Western Avenue in Maryland.
Right.
Street.
I think it's Allen, right?
Allen Road.
Allen Road, yeah.
And it was first built in 1923. Then in the 1970s, a famous futurist, Roy Mason, an architect, made it into this whimsical house using polyurethane for the shape, and for the insulation.
Which nowadays, if we had Frank Gehry, we'd probably use metal for it, but yeah.
So
it's the proper material for the time, yes.
Roy Mason was kind of famous. He created similar kinds of polyurethane structures around the United States. A famous one in Kissimmee, Florida, called the Xanadu House. It was a famous tourist attraction in the 1900s. It had 1,000 visitors a day. He was the editor of the Futurist magazine. He created interesting exhibitions at the Capitol Children's Museum, where he was a volunteer. And so we have one of his legacy architectural gems in our neighborhood.
It is definitely. I love it. It just sticks out like a sore thumb. He did it perfectly.
Yeah.
So let's get down to something a little more traditional. Can you tell us a little bit about James Wormley?
So yeah, James Wormley, fascinating figure from American history during the Reconstruction period in American history after the Civil War, when Blacks were emancipated and allowed to vote and read and learn and run for office. And James Wormley was he was born a freed man as an African American, but at the beginning of his life, he could only take the jobs that were allocated to African Americans, which were being servants to the white population, or livery drivers. His father had a livery business, horse and buggy, delivering things. And so James learned the trade there. He went off to California. He was a 49er, a gold rush 49er. He was a steward on Mississippi riverboats. He did this and that. He came back to Washington, though, and during Reconstruction, he started a catering business and then a restaurant. And then that restaurant became a hotel, the Wormley Hotel. It was a stone's throw from the White House at H and I Streets. And for the vegetables for his restaurant, which was a very high-class restaurant, he grew them on his family estate on Van Ness, Van Ness in Reno. He had a 10-acre estate there. This estate also had a horse track. James Wormley had been a jockey at one point, younger man. And there's a sign on Van Ness for the James Wormley estate showing that this was where it was. And James Wormley, if I give me another minute here.
Absolutely. To me, to me today, this of all the properties has a particular interest because it's so poignant to be doing this in Black History Month. So, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, James Wormley Hotel was a famous meeting place for politicians.
Mm-hmm.
It was, one of the best places, one of the best restaurants. It had, I think, the first telephone installed. It had James Philip Sousa would lead the Marine Band at events there. Politicians would meet and argue and do their business. And they had very big business to discuss in 1877. This was after the 1876 contested election between Rutherford B. Hayes and what was the Democrat? Sorry, I forgot his name for just a minute here. Hayes lost the popular vote, but he won the Electoral College by 1 vote on the basis of votes from Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, mm-hmm. which were run by Reconstruction governments. The Republican Party of that day, they were the Liberal Party that day,
right?
It was contested, and there was a big to-do. And at Wormley's Hotel, they hammered out the compromise of 1877, whereby the Democrats agreed that, okay, Rutherford B. Hayes can take the presidency in exchange for ending Reconstruction. Federal troops had to leave Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, and all the gains of Reconstruction were reversed in the ensuing years. The southern states put in poll taxes. They put in these laws that required African Americans to pass incredible tests in order to register to vote. Like how many bubbles in a bar of soap was one of them.
Yeah. It was ridiculous. Yeah.
And so it was, that was not a proud moment in American history, the compromise of.
I totally agree with you. But it was interesting when I was reading your book, the detail about and the fact that I just mentioned that this is Black History Month, and what caught my attention more than the conflict itself is what a free man, because he was, coming from nothing, could accomplish in that time.
Yeah.
It was fabulous.
And James Wormley, he had nothing to do with that compromise. He was not where it happened. He went on to do other great things. He devoted his life to the cause of African American education. Mm-hmm. He persuaded the Congress to fund the city's first public school for Black students. So James Wormley, a name to remember.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. So after James Wormley, why don't we go in and talk about John Mclean? Completely different.
Completely different. Opposite side of the social economic strata. John Mclean and his wife, Ned. Okay, let's just start from the beginning here. We're talking about Mclean Gardens.
Exactly. Just so we all know.
Couple dozen red brick buildings that today are a condominium. Those red brick buildings were built in the 1940s to house federal workers who were employed in the defense industry when the United States was in World War II.
Right.
The government bought that property from the Mclean family. It had been built originally by John Mclean, a real estate magnate, newspaper owner.
Right.
He also ran a railway. The railway was the Great Falls and Old Dominion Railroad, which ran out to Mclean, Virginia. Mclean, Virginia, of course, is named after
John. After John, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, John's son, Ned, now here we get the notorious part of the family. Ned married another fabulously rich heiress, Evelyn Walsh. Her father had discovered a gold mine in the Dakotas. and they were just fabulously rich. She was a leading socialite in Washington. They had fabulous parties at their estate, Mclean Gardens. She is most well known for the Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond, four centuries old. It originated in India. It's got this blue color because of the cobalt
Right.
portions in it. It's got this myth of being a fatal, bringing mortality, and because it was once owned by King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, who of course guillotined in the French Revolution.
Beheaded, yeah.
And then this myth was magnified when Evelyn's and Ned's 11-year-old son Victor was killed dashing across Wisconsin Avenue. So a lot of tragedy associated with this diamond. Well, eventually that diamond was passed on to Evelyn's heirs, but there was no money in the estate. Evelyn and Ned had used it all up in their escapades in the 20s. So the diamond had to be sold to pay for their debts. It was sold to a New York diamond merchant, Harry Winston, who in 1958 donated it to the Smithsonian Institution.
Right.
It has ever since then been probably the most watched, visited, famous exhibition at the
Smithsonian.
Yeah. So anyway, the Mclean Gardens, they became apartments, and then it became it was the owners made it into engaged with they bought it out and they made condominiums out of it, and ever since it's been the place where a lot of kind of famous people live, politicians, diplomats. I've had several of my friends in the diplomatic service said, yeah, they lived there one time.
It's very well located.
Most recent famous person I know who lived there was Maria Boutina, the Russian redhead, who's the center of my last story in my book. 2 years ago, she was accused of being a Russian agent because she was hobnobbing with this much older Republican operative, and she was making friends with the National Rifle Association and a lot of fishy business. But I don't think she was really an agent. I think she just was in over her head.
There you go. She got caught in the middle of something.
Yeah, exactly.
But it wasn't Mclean Gardens, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So on to our last property. Sorry about that. Can you talk about Scott E. Weller of the Under Oak property, which is located at 4220 Nebraska?
Yeah. So this was one that I passed by almost every day. It's very.
I bet you did.
It's got these tall fences, and I always wondered what's behind there, and I couldn't see anything other than this like a turret,
that we all see. Exactly.
Round right on the corner, Van Ness and 42nd Street, or 43rd, I guess it is. No, 42nd. And I wondered, what is that? And so I tried to crowdsource the question on Twitter. I posted a picture and I said, anybody know what this is? And I got back lots of interesting ideas. Some people thought it was a dovecot, where people raise doves, and others thought it might be an ice house and different things. One person said, I bet that it was something else and it was just repurposed. It probably belonged to some other property and they just probably repurposed it there. And then I talked with Jane Waldeman, the president of the Tenleytown Heritage Society, and she said, yeah, that's what it was. It was it had belonged. It was part of a property at Mount Alton, at the where the Russian embassy is now. Mount Alto in Glover, where the Russian embassy is now. There was a country house there that had very nice. Had these two turrets on it, two cupulas, and Wiley Buchanan, I got to talk about the Buchanans. They were the owners
Sure.
of the property. Got to talk about them in a minute. Wiley Buchanan saw these cupolas at the where there's some mansion was being taken down at Glover Park, and he acquired them, and he put one in his backyard as what you would call a garden folly, just ornamentation.
Right.
And he donated the other one to the Washington home, where it's been put at it's the corner of, I think, 37th and Upton.
Mm-hmm.
And home is now been bought by Sibley, not Sibley, the school.
Yeah.
Sidwell. It's been bought
Sidwell,
by
right. Sidwell. That's Sibley. Sidwell.
Friendship School.
Right.
Sidwell Friends School. And but anyway, the cupola is still there. So getting back to the Buchanans, Wiley Buchanan was a Texan oilman. He married the heiress of a chemical company, and so they were very wealthy. She was the heiress of the founder of Dow Chemicals.
There you go.
He gave money to Dwight Eisenhower's presidential campaign, and maybe in exchange, like it happens a lot, he was appointed as an ambassador to Luxembourg, and then later he became U.S. Chief of Protocol for Eisenhower, in which capacity he helped arrange visits by Soviet Premier Khrushchev. And I wrote a book about how Khrushchev's wife was at the property,
right,
being escorted by Ruth Buchanan, showing the pool. And I talked with the Wiley and Ruth's daughter, who told me more stories about the Khrushchevs and how Khrushchev, one time in the car with Wiley Buchanan, said to Wiley, I know you don't like communism, but I'll tell you, your grandchildren will be communists. The opposite has happened. Khrushchev's grandchildren have become capitalists. One of them
right.
lives,
exactly. The opposite
capitalists too.
Yeah. So he wasn't good at predicting, that much I can say.
And then anyway, Wiley was also appointed ambassador to Vienna by Gerald Ford later. And during these periods when he was posted as ambassador, he would rent out his house. So when he was ambassador to Vienna, Henry Kissinger rented the house when he newly got married. And then earlier on, when Wiley was ambassador to Luxembourg in the 1950s, the heiress of General Foods, Marjorie Merriweather
Post
lived there. And that while she had bought this property now called Hillwood Estate.
Exactly, which is beautiful, by the way.
It's a museum,
Yeah.
While they were building that, she rented Under Oak to live in.
That's wonderful.
The last story about Under Oak, the oak is not there anymore. It got mostly taken down 2 years ago because it was just too old. But it was this fantastic oak. At one point, they used to say it was Washington's grandest oak, and you could see it from all over. And when in indigenous times, the Indians, indigenous people, I don't know if they worshipped it, but they certainly had respect for it.
That's wonderful. So I really, really appreciate you're giving us all these little tidbits. I tell my colleagues in real estate, you have to watch this because it gives you material to talk about these properties to your clients, be it properties per se or questions about the reservoir, which we always get, what is that up there? Is there anything that we're supposed to know that might be, government or whatever? So I so appreciate your giving us an insight. I know it's just a little tidbit of 5 properties on your walking trail of every day.
5 of the 70, yes, thank you.
Exactly. So I do want to remind everybody to click on subscribe so you get to watch both of our videos. And in addition to that, the book called Spies,
Bombs and Beyond.
Bombs and Beyond, a walking tour Washington, D.C.'s Tenleytown. Mark Fitzpatrick, it's been an honor to have this conversation with you, and I hope to have another one with you soon.
Thanks,
Take care.
Adrian. I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye-bye.